already a couple of months into the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, Nintendo's first home console in over 8 years. And the early verdict is in. It is somewhere between the greatest Nintendo console of all time and an absolute joke. We may need a second to clarify on that. But one thing we can lay judgment down on now is every other Nintendo console. I have been obsessively researching all of the charts, data, articles, and reviews, every single thing I could find about all of these plastic platforms, combing through everything to determine the absolute truth. Which Nintendo console is the best of all time? Who's the GOAT, and why? So there's a lot we need to consider when thinking about what makes a video game console even good. So here's the rules. We're looking at every single major Nintendo console released after the NES, handhelds included, for 11 major competitors with over 40 years of gaming history. I'm combining all similar consoles and versions together, which is pretty obvious for all of the different Switches and DS's. The Game Boy and the Game Boy Color are a tiny bit of a stretch, but I'm counting it, and most major sales reports combine the data, they count it, so that's what we're doing. I also primarily focused on each console's impact and importance in their own era. After all, there was a time when this was extremely impressive. Or this. And while we might not be living in those eras now, we gotta respect it like we are. And one last bias I want to consider here is that I live in the United States, so a lot of my perspective is gonna be the good old American one. It's a big market, but it's not the only one, and while I did try my best to look at the global picture on things, it's totally my bad if I miss something. Each console will be ranked and scored from 1 to 5 over 8 major categories, looking at every single aspect that makes a game console great. I looked at the masses, the markets, the data, every single piece of information that I could find that gave me the complete picture of what the best console is of all time. That means that my own opinions and biases mean nothing today. I want to know what the people want. And speaking of what the people want, let's look at what the people actually wanted. So this is the easiest piece of data that we can find when stacking up each console to another. Which one sold the most? Boom, there it is. The breaks here are actually pretty jarring. The top 3 highest selling consoles have pushed about as many units as the other 8 combined. Now this is a helpful starting point, but another thing I wanted to look at was inflation. How do these numbers change with inflation? Not inflation of the dollar, no. Inflation of the world! These newer consoles get a buff because there were literally billions of more human beings on the planet who could buy a new Nintendo. So what happens to this chart if we adjust sales based on the percentage of the population at each point in time, normalizing against the 2017 launch of the Nintendo Switch? Okay, not a lot actually happens, but it's sort of interesting. The Game Boy gets the biggest bump, launching it up into second place, theoretically. It's only a tiny part of the story because obviously more people are aware of and purchase video games today than ever before. But still, it used to be a smaller world out there. And a final thing we can look at is how each of these consoles performed against their competition. What was the market share? Again, this is not a perfect stat, but let's just take a look at the full picture and see if we can note any more trends. It could not be more obvious that Nintendo has basically always dominated the handheld market, with all 4 of its dedicated handhelds in the top 5. My personal favorite here is the Game Boy Advance because it runs pretty much unopposed. Its competition was the Japan-only Wonder Song and the failed early mobile gaming Taco hybrid in the N-Gauge. That system was a choice. The NES really stands out here as by far the highest pure home console market share, absolutely crushing the new Atari and Sega's Master System. Fun fact though, the NES did not actually crush it in Europe, where overall it split the market closer to 50-50 with Sega's Master System. Amongst the rest, the Super Nintendo is the last one to have over 50% market share, and the Wii is the final console to outsell all of its competitors. The Nintendo Switch is a weird one because it kind of exists on its own. It came out 3 years after the PS4 generation, but then 4 years before the PS5 generation. I mean, no matter how you look at it, it's the best-selling video game console of the last decade or so, but it is sort of in a world of its own. Totally unrelated, but this was the part of my video where I learned that the Steam Deck has sold only like 4 million units, which sort of blows my mind. I sort of just assumed that everybody cared about this kind of thing as much as I do, but then again, my interest in portable consoles is by no means normal, so okay, maybe that tracks. Okay, that's enough yapping. It's judgment time! I'm giving 1 star to the GameCube and the Wii U. These two unfortunately stick out like a sore thumb across every list. Both consoles had well under 15% market share, and they sold under 30 million units, even with a population inflation bump. The Wii U was dominated by its higher performing competition, and it really suffered from poor marketing. A ton of consumers just thought the Wii U was a tablet add-on for the old Wii. And heck, the Wii already had a U tablet. The Wii U. Draw. From THQ. I'm not gonna lie though, the GameCube really surprises me. I sure feel like a lot of my friends had one, but yeah, saw my fair share of Xboxes, and yeah, everyone had a PlayStation 2, even if it was just the family's first DVD player. Globally, the Cube just doesn't stack up. The Xbox got destroyed by the PS2, and the GameCube still fell below that. This was some weird perspective for me, but there are only about twice as many GameCubes in the world as there are Sega Dreamcasts. By the way, I do just want to lay out the disclaimer that it brings me no joy saying bad things about Nintendo consoles. I love every Nintendo console. I love basically every video game console. But we just gotta be honest here and weigh each one based on how they did compared to each other. Gotta stay impartial. I'm trying my best. 2 stars goes to the Nintendo 64, which did hold a slightly better spot in the market, but still got nearly tripled in sales by the PS1. It was the first time in over a decade of dominance that Nintendo got straight up ousted by another console. Next, we got 3 stars for the Super Nintendo, which sold well, but nothing too crazy. Competition from the Sega Genesis, aka Mega Drive, was really strong in the West, where they were going 50-50 or even losing over some months. That's some heavy lifting for a console that's almost 2 years older. Most people consider this to be the original console war. And just as an aside here, but console wars are kinda cringe. You know, play the games that you like, don't shame other people for playing the games that they like. There's good stuff on every single console. But for the sake of this video, a lot of people only have enough money to buy one console for their household, so we gotta talk about which ones were good enough to get people to open up their wallets to pay for one. 4 stars goes to the 3DS, which I would consider just one tier below the best of the best. It sold a lot, but a bit less than the top tier, and less than I was expecting for a modern system with such little console competition. The invisible competitor was actually phones, where singular touchscreen rectangles really started to get a focused push for quality and accessible software. And finally, I'm giving 5 stars to a whopping 6 different Nintendo consoles, all for pretty obvious reasons. They made cash money, and they were absurdly popular. 5 of these 6 are in the top 10 for all video game consoles sold of all time. And the 6th is the NES, which I'm giving a 5-star pass for having a really solid population-adjusted sales rate and a massive market share. Within its own era, at the end of the 80s, it had hit 60 million units sold. More than double any home console in history at that point in time. Round 1, done. Next one is kind of a hot-button Nintendo topic right now, and that is... a great video game console should feel like you got it for a good value. You should walk away feeling like it was worth your money. After all, that is one of the biggest things that separates video game consoles from the more expensive and more powerful PCs. And while we do typically think of Nintendo consoles as underpriced but also underpowered, the true story is a little bit different. Let's check it out. As always, let's kick things off with the raw numbers. Here is the launch price of every single major Nintendo console. Now, we do need to make a couple of bullet points right off the bat. First of all, a ton of people like to quote the $180 price of the NES launch, but that was for a very limited 1985 test launch in North America that included a bunch of accessories like the Zapper and Rob. For one, retailers were really pushing this thing out for $140, and for two, by the time the NES had its actual countrywide launch, it was going for a clean $100 package with 2 controllers and Mario Bros, which is what I'm gonna base today's score off of. Secondly, the 3DS did launch at $250, and it was given a gigantic price cut shortly afterward. We'll circle back on this, but I'm gonna go ahead and list both prices depending on which you count as the game's real launch price. And finally, the Wii U technically launched with 2 different system configurations at both $300 and $350. The $350 one had 4 times the storage, a tiny accessory, and Nintendo Land. I'm running both numbers here because while that first system was cheaper, it was discontinued pretty quickly. Just like, anecdotally, I don't think I have a single friend who owns the white version of this console. I don't even know if I've seen one in person. So once again, we need to take inflation into account, this time the real dollar inflation kind. Very unshockingly, the handhelds are at the lowest. And yeah, this is a danger when we want to include handhelds and consoles in the same competition, but there are still definitely distinguishable value tiers even amongst each other. As far as major systems go, the NES and GameCube are the real value kings, while the OG Nintendo Switch is the last console that slides in just below that $400 inflation adjustment. Another hot topic right now is the cost of video game software, so I thought it would be fun to look at the prices of games on each of these consoles when they came out, and of course, compare it to inflation. Shoutouts to oogajohnson.com for having this amazing collection of old magazines and catalogs showing off the price of games during a lot of these early console years. As someone who grew up during this time, it's just so much of a joy looking at these old catalogs and remembering my own childhood, circling games that I wanted and adding them to Christmas wish lists or saving up my allowance money or whatever. If you grew up in the 80s or the 90s, you better give your mama or papa or auntie or whatever a phone call right now and tell them thank you. Let them know how much they mean to you, because oh my god, were these systems expensive for the time that they existed in. Actually, scratch that. Just give them a phone call anyways and tell them I love you. You should never forget to let the people that are important to you know how much they mean to you. Okay, back to video games. Things are fairly normalized over the price of handheld games and console games, but woof! The Super Nintendo and the N64 are some real sticker shockers, with even the cheapest games going for over $100 in value today. Also, this chart is just loosely looking at how much games cost at launch, but there are some wild examples if you want to dig them out. Stuff like a $50 Final Fantasy for the NES in 1990, which would go for $120 today. A $75 Street Fighter II in 1992, good for $170 today. Or an $80 Final Fantasy III, aka Final Fantasy VI, for $80 in 1994, which would be almost $175 today. Alright, it's time to deal out some scores, but first I do want to let you know that as I go through each category, I'm also going to be comparing these consoles to their competition. After all, if a console is expensive, but a lot cheaper than its competitors, that's still a good value, right? I think? No 1 stars today. I don't think a Nintendo console has ever been egregiously overpriced, but I am giving 2 stars to the 2 consoles we were just talking about, the Super Nintendo and the N64. Besides being 2 of the highest inflation-adjusted consoles period, and with by far the most expensive games, neither stacked up especially well to their competitors either. The Genesis was a few years older and really attractively priced during some of those early holiday years in the US, and that's probably why it was the first video game console my family ever owned. And while the PlayStation did launch a full $100 higher than the N64, they basically immediately dropped it to $200 in order to match the N64 by the time it got rolling in the West. Over time, the cost of their disc-based games kept crawling down, while the new N64 cartridge games stayed up. I specifically remember mowing the lawn for an entire spring just so that I could afford this one $70 game. Meanwhile, I could have bought 2 or even more PS1 games for the same price. Is this one video game really good enough to be worth 2 other PS1 games? I'm giving 3 stars to the Wii U, which might seem shocking at first because it is the most expensive console when you account for inflation. Even more expensive than a Switch 2 when you consider that deluxe set, which everybody got. But at the time, it was seen as a nice budget option to the big $400 to $500 Xbox and PlayStation offerings. It started off at a hot price, but almost never went on a sale. The gamepad alone cost over 1/3 of the production of the unit, which is often cited as a reason for why they couldn't afford to keep cutting things down. Next up, I'm giving 4 stars to the oldest Nintendo console, the newest Nintendo console, and the 3DS. The Switch is a weird one. By the time it launched, you could get a discounted base PS4 or Xbox One for less. However, they continued to stay as the definitively cheap system in its lifespan, which rolled right into the PS5 era. And they got a true budget support option for those who wanted the little Switch Lite. Also, I do just want to let it be known that I finished writing and researching this video just before they did the price increases, which I guess everybody this generation is doing now. I don't know how to account for this. This is totally new ground for me. I desperately wish I lived in precedented times. The NES was extremely well priced at launch for what it was offering, and it was by far the cheapest non-portable Nintendo system when adjusting for inflation. As far as software and hardware go, I would call it competitive, but not an unbelievable steal. It was a solid value against its 1986 competition when they launched, but as we got further into the generation, everything was about the same cost. The 3DS also added one of those nice budget options over the years. Its software was dirt cheap, and it ended up as a really affordable PS Vita competitor, especially since the Vita shot themselves in the foot with their expensive proprietary storage. However, I personally refuse to give them the 5 because of that launch price fiasco. Dropping a price of a console by 33% in less than half a year is unheard of. It really felt like they tried to pull a fast one on us, complete with a little downloadable sticker you could get that said, "Thanks for buying this thing at full price," and some GBA games or whatever. They didn't even have all the functionality of the Virtual Console. I guess it's up to us to determine if that price cut was really smart, or if they were just being really greedy from the beginning. And 5 stars goes to the best of the rest. Like I said, Nintendo is known for this, providing a good value for a cheap system that still does cool things, and they did it a lot. Here's a couple of highlights for me over the years, like the Wii launching at basically the same date as the PS3 at half the price. Or like the Game Boy Advance, that comes in at the lowest post-inflation cost for hardware and software despite having zero competition. And no, I am certainly not including the N-Gage, which I unfortunately remember revealed its $300 price point in a press conference with a performance that had a woman take off her shirt to reveal the price on her stomach. We've gone over it time and time again, but Nintendo is known for being cheap. One thing they are known less about, though, is... which is kind of funny considering the whole slogan that they had. But... technical power and graphical capability are absolutely a reason that people buy video game consoles, so I'm gonna put Nintendo through the ringer here. It's kind of what you'd expect. You pay the big money for the big power and the small money for the small power. Scores here are gonna be roughly in line with that trend, but there are still a few surprises. I'm just gonna go straight into the stars here because all we have to go on power is evaluating what each system brought to the table during their unique era compared to what else was available. Now, absolutely expectedly, we got a whole lot of mid and low scores to give out. Starting with 1, we've got the Wii, which, if you grew up during this era, should come as zero surprise at all. Specs-wise, it's a slightly more powerful GameCube, and that was by design. They decided to take their systems on a totally different direction, and it succeeded on other fronts. But not on power. It's as simple as it was an SD console in an HD era. The Wii runs a video signal at good old-fashioned red, yellow, and white 480i resolution, and you could buy specialty cables if you wanted to get that thing up to 480p. The PS3 and 360 are still on the very relevant today HDMI cables for 720p and very occasional true 1080p support. I'm not saying that the Wii or any of these low-scoring consoles didn't have good games, or that they didn't have good-looking games, but it is by far the farthest leap back in technical ability that I've ever seen for a Nintendo machine. I'm also, maybe controversially, handing out a single star to another very successful Nintendo console, the DS. This one at least did surpass the GBA by a bit, extending gameplay across 2 displays, gaining a dual-core processor, 3D capabilities, and hardware processing. However, when you pit this thing directly against the PSP, it just feels like completely different tech generations. The PSP had twice the resolution, significantly deeper color capability, 3 times the processing speed, 8 times the RAM, it just goes on and on. It's hard to do it justice now when we're watching everything on big screens, but looking at the original hardware of the DS Kingdom Hearts game versus the PSP one, I just feel like I'm looking at a PS1 game versus a PS2. It's a big gap. And speaking of 2, I got a big old deuce to drop on the Wii U. Just on the pure eye test, the Wii U looks like a real video game system. It's kind of sad that the bar for excellence here is can play video games in HD, but yeah, by 2012 they finally figured it out. The Wii U is quite strange, because they had a decently comparable and even superior GPU and memory compared to the PS3 and Xbox 360. However, they did have a way underpowered CPU, and that made it hard to easily port the best games of that generation without doing some rebuilding from the ground up. And that's a problem in itself, because I'm comparing the power of this thing to the console generation that launched 7 years prior. 1 year after the Wii U dropped, the Xbox One and PS4 hit, absolutely putting this thing in the dirt with like 4 times the power on most metrics. We'll talk more about the gamepad and whether it was good or not later, but it was a bit low resolution at 480p. It's another weak system, but I am giving it 1 more point than its predecessors because the generational gap is just not quite as strong at this point. And I'm giving 2 stars to the 3DS for that exact same reason. Just like the DS before it, it was absolutely overpowered by its PlayStation competitor. But the deeper you get into history, the more narrow that tech gap feels, even between strong and weak consoles. Plus, even though they barely utilized the potential of this thing, I'd say that the new 3DS narrows that bridge just a tiny bit more as well. My final two is going to the OG Game Boy. The Game Gear and even the Atari Lynx had color backlit screens, more total shades, more processing power, and their commercials absolutely let you know it. However, the Game Boy had one killer feature that kind of defined the entire Nintendo portable handheld strategy for decades, and that was battery life. A Game Boy could run for 3 to 6 times longer than a Game Gear on just 4 AA batteries instead of 6. And that is a big deal. You have to consider, this was a world without everybody having a cell phone. This was the thing that you could do on a long flight, or the subway, or wherever you were going or doing or whatever you went. It might not be raw power, but the conservation of power is powerful in itself. 3 stars going to a system that we're very familiar with in this day and age, the Nintendo Switch. This system is really hard to match up. It's between generations, and it's also a home console portable hybrid. What do we do with you? Graphically, on your TV, the Nintendo Switch is over a full generation behind. However, as a portable console, it was absolutely the most powerful main console device that you could bring wherever you wanted for several years. I mean, it was basically the only device like this, but the jump over the 3DS and even the PS Vita felt very significant. It's kinda hard to find the balance for a device like this, so I feel like 3 is fitting. Kinda surprisingly, I have 4 stars to hand out, which I gave to consoles that I felt were at least competitive with the other systems in their field, and maybe even excelled in an area or two. The original NES was an absolute beast for the time that it was alone on the market, especially when you consider that in Japan, it released over 3 years before its national release in the United States. It was just such a massive upgrade over the mainstay Atari 2600 and ColecoVision at the time. Once the 7800 and the Master System hit the market, things get a little more complex. In terms of raw stats, you'll find lots of areas where the other two systems are more powerful, such as faster processing or more colors. However, the NES still pulls its weight very well with a really solid sound chip right out of the box and a great base resolution across all its games. My next 4 is going to the Nintendo 60. 4. At first glance, this seems like it should be an obvious 5. The N64 specs look like it's from another generation. It had a significantly faster CPU, more RAM, almost 10 times the polygon count. Its graphics had perspective correction and bilinear filtering, which allowed for 3D camera shifting without everything warping and bubbling all over the place. However, it also suffered one of the greatest console bottlenecks of all time. They used one of these guys instead of one of these guys. CDs had over 50 times the storage capacity of the Nintendo 64 cartridges at launch, which meant CDs got larger textures and way more space for things like full motion video and high quality soundtracks. The N64 still has a very specific style of game that it ran incredibly well, but you can feel those limitations, especially when entire genres like RPGs were in such short supply. If only the Nintendo 64 just learned to embrace the CD-ROM! They did have a Japan-only disk drive add-on, and even that was 64MB floppy disks. It's crazy, because as far back as the early 90s, they were experimenting with CDs, featuring a partnership with Sony? Oh dear. Well, thankfully, I'm sure Nintendo will learn from this mistake and never make it again.
Oh my god, they did it again!
The GameCube came onto the scene about the same time as the Xbox, both jumping into the fray as an attempt to compete with the already monolithic PS2. And on paper, yeah, the GameCube is a strong little box. Specs-wise, it slots neatly in between the PS2 and the Xbox. As far as I'm concerned, it's a perfectly viable modern system in terms of power. However, they did decide to do their own special little format again to combat privacy and licensing fees, which gives you the mini DVD. That's 3 times smaller than a standard DVD, which is also even smaller than those rare games that were using dual-layer DVDs. It was not a cataclysmic drop in quality, but there are definitely instances where ports between the consoles have a limited or cut content on the GameCube compared to the others because of it. Still, especially by Nintendo standards, this console felt on par for its generation, and that's pretty rare. Even though they didn't have rare anymore. And lastly, I'm giving a 4 to the Game Boy Advance. I'm not gonna lie, It kind of grabs a score on a technicality, because again, the GBA just doesn't have a competitor. But regardless of what else was out there, it did feel like a world of difference when comparing it from the last gasping breath of the Game Boy, which was really starting to show its age by the end of the century. We went from an 8-bit system to a 32-bit one with a much stronger memory and processing speed. It even had 3D. Okay, maybe not the best 3D, but still. It wasn't without a few limitations though. Even though it was often capable of running Super Nintendo games, the system's lower resolution has them feeling a tad worse than the originals. But outside of that, I don't know, it's just a nice system that did nice things for its time. And while it might not have had the best Super Nintendo ports, you know who did? The Super Nintendo, duh. I've already mentioned this, but I grew up with a Sega Genesis as my first home console. I love this thing, and some of my favorite games of all time are on this thing, and it did have a faster processor, like how the commercials tried to drill into our heads. So it handles sprites well, and it has a very good display at moving fast objects. It's great for sports games and shoot 'em ups, of course. But with all my Genesis praise, I really truly feel like the Super Nintendo is a heavier lifter everywhere else. I was jealous of any friend that had this thing. It could display so many more colors on screen for deep, beautiful visuals. It could create pseudo 3D effects by rotating and scaling sprites in real time. And it had a state-of-the-art sample-based sound chip. Once again, very funnily, made by Sony. It also took the NES philosophy of adding additional hardware for boosting effects on the cartridges to push this system to its max, allowing it to have competitive games way up into the 32-bit era. It's not exactly shocking, and it released multiple years after the Genesis, but I feel like this is the only time that you can make a case that a Nintendo console with serious competition was actually the strongest console available. And no, I do not count the $650 Neo Geo Gold Home arcade console with the $200 games. Dear Lord, do I even want to adjust that for inflation? Oof! Oh my god, it's giving me physical damage! Ah! King of Fighters is still pretty sick though. Now, I'm sure at this point you're absolutely sick of hearing about the boxes and what the boxes did and how many of the boxes sold. And at the end of the day, what does the box even matter if it doesn't have good video games to play? So we have not just one, not two, but 3 categories all dedicated to the video game software on each console. Let's go for it. Game on. It's simple. People want to play the video games that their friends are playing. They want to have shared experiences. And while, yeah, the video game consoles that sold the best also have a lot of video games that sold the best, but there's more going on here, and as usual, we're gonna dig it up. For starters, here's a list of the total software sold across all Nintendo consoles. Oh my god, does the Switch go absolutely nuts, though? It's just so far ahead of any Nintendo console ever in this category. Those numbers also look roughly in the same order as how many systems were sold. But the ratios do move things around a little bit. If a system has good games, you'd want to own a lot of games for it, right? Well, here's the average amount of games owned per system sold, or the attach rate. By this one metric, the GameCube finally rockets up to the top. Look at him go! Followed by the Switch, the Wii, and the OG home consoles to round out the top. Now, sometimes these numbers are wrong for kind of silly reasons. For one, if you grew up in the 80s to the early 2000s, you might have noticed that you didn't always buy your games. It was super common to rent them. You go to a store, give them a couple of bucks, play your game for a couple of days, and bring it back. For a smaller game that you're gonna beat in one weekend and never touch again, you'd save a ton of money. Some of the handheld consoles are also stunted a bit because it overlaps with upgrades. For example, let's say you buy a 3DS, but then you get a 3DS XL, and then later you exchange that for a new 3DS. Well, this graph is counting your one library against 3 separate consoles registered as sold. So, it ain't perfect. Another silly graph I made is one I call the Banger Index, which counts how many games each system had that sold over 1 million units. It's still a measure of popularity, but the idea is to minimize the ridiculous impact of a single huge game carrying an entire system's success. This helped me find more high quality but still million-seller games that you might not have heard of, like High School Musical, Making the Cut, brought to you exclusively by the Disney Propaganda Machine.
Chester, here's the video game convention called E3, where the newest High School Musical video game is being unveiled. Let's get started!
Yeah, that's right. You can be any of 6 High School Musical characters, and you can customize your own character.
Jeez, man, I can't believe E3's gone. Look what they took from us! The final list is a little bit less exciting compared to what we already know about how each system sold, but I tried, okay? For the stars on this one, I decided to distribute them based on how each of these consoles did across all 3 of these charts on average. This might feel a little sudden, but here are the full scores. Boom. Once again, big surprise, the systems that sold the best also sold the most games, but there are a few standouts. The GameCube is still an absolute sales dumpster, but that attach rate did bring it up to a respectable 3. And oh my gosh, the GBA just tanks it, going from a 5 in system popularity all the way down to a 1 here. The poor guy never got a chance to stand on his own. It launched in 2001, and then just 3 years later, the DS launched out of the gates in 2004. That is the shortest lifespan of any major Nintendo console. Well... So yeah, selling games is cool. But you know what's really cool? Selling good games. While deciding whether or not a video game is good is about as subjective as you can possibly get, I have decided to remove my own opinions entirely from this equation and look at the 2 biggest sources that we can see for what the masses think about whether a video game is good or not. The critics and the gamers themselves. Critics and the general public do not always agree, and arguably do not always get it right, which is why I'm hoping that both sides of the coin will combine to tell us a complete story. So, what's the press think about Nintendo? A lot, apparently. The best place to start, for better and for worse, is Metacritic, which is by far the most popular video game review compiler. Unfortunately, its reviews only go as far back as the Nintendo 64 era, so our most geriatric consoles are not included in this dataset. Don't worry though, we do have plenty more spaces to talk about these other 3. To find a nice mix of great video games, I decided to see how many of these games on each Nintendo console scored an 85 or higher, which I feel like is a strong cutoff point. This is going to come up a lot over these next 2 sections, but I tried to break up graphs where I could into 2 different versions. One with exclusives, and one with totals. For exclusives, I'm looking at just that. Games that originally debuted on a Nintendo console exclusively. Or if they launched at the same time for more than one Nintendo console, then both consoles would get the point. Kinda weird that Zelda's done that twice. I did even count fringe scenarios like Resident Evil 4, which was a launch exclusive for a Nintendo platform. For, I don't know, like a year. The Capcom 5. Good times. I think Beautiful Joe counts for that too. This means that I did not count remakes most of the time unless they included some kind of significant new form of content on their own. And then for that second category, totals, I just counted everything, including third-party games and remakes. A very funny thing happens when you do this, which you will notice right away. Alright, let's see it. Metacritic, original exclusive games for each console, score of 85+, with their minimum reviews of, I think it's 7? Give me the list. Oh wow, look at that. Well, besides one very obvious outlier, I was not expecting so much parity here. 22 games for the lowest entry, and then 31 for the highest means everything is pretty even. This validates my scorching hot take that most Nintendo consoles have very good video games. But let's see what happens when we start to include those third-party games and re-releases. Perhaps one of these consoles will— Oh! Basically every time we add the total scores with third-party and remakes, the same thing happens. 1. The Switch very obviously gets a humongous lift, carried heavily by the fact that the modern gaming world has fully embraced downloadable titles and indie games. Indies have less heavy power requirements and are almost always available on the Switch. The world is better for it, but yeah, it just kinda blows up the data. A second noticeable bump is the GameCube, which despite having some small limitations with the mini CDs, usually had fully fledged versions of excellent AAA games. This score is absolutely buffed by sports games though, because you're going to see every high scoring entry of Madden count here. So I guess that could be a GameCube bias if you consider those to not be unique enough to be separate games. That's on you. The Wii gets a very similar but smaller boost, and that's because there's a billion Guitar Heroes that all made its way there. But Metacritic is just one website with one piece of the puzzle, so let's try a few more on for size. Next up is Moby Games, another longtime gaming database that also lets us look at reviews for older games. Another few differences here. They are way less strict when it comes to which press outlets are included in their score formula, and they also allow game reviews that are way after the original game release. To be honest, I am mostly cool with this, because the truth is that when you start digging for old game reviews, most of them do not include a nice clean numbered score alongside them for us to see. By the way, just as an aside to the camera, this is going against what we're doing right now, but I do highly recommend you actually read a video game review from the top to the bottom instead of just scrolling down and seeing the score. You might actually learn something about— all right, let's see them scores, baby! Looking at the top 250 games of all time on Moby Games, with 5 or more critic scores, our console tally looks like this. And yeah, right off the bat, you can see that some of these old Nintendo consoles are right in the mix, with the Super Nintendo taking our top spot, and surprisingly, the Game Boy really getting a ton of love. Honestly, it is still a tight race here, though. Allowing the third-party competition, though, and— oh, I'm so shocked. Switch and the GameCube blasted off again. There's also more we can look at beyond just review scores. We want to learn about the greatest games of all time, so let's look at some lists of the greatest games of all time. Starting with good old Wikipedia, they made this cute list of the best games of all time that appeared on at least 6 major publication lists, and that's inclusive of all eras. I looked at just the exclusives here, and the Super Nintendo is a clear leader, with basically every other non-Wii U home console in the mix. Critics had previously given us solid review scores for the portable systems, but I guess they just don't think handheld games are the true GOATs, huh?
They're absolutely wrong!
But again, it's not my opinion today, I'm staying out of it. Thankfully for us, there are a few good handful of websites that use various formulas and weighted averages in order to create a greatest of all time list, so I added more of these into the mix for good measure. This one is the website Video Game Canon, and when we look at their top 100 games of all time, it gives us a list that is almost the exact same as the Wikipedia one. Notably though, the DS and 3DS have a grand total of 0 entries. The Pwn Rank Top 100 once again gives us an extremely similar spread, including now 3 portable consoles with 0 entries. But if these top 100s feel too restrictive for you, I do have one last website to check with, and it has a top 1,000! The last list comes from a really cool modern website I stumbled across called Acclaimed Video Games, which attempts to compile and quantify a humongous list of all times, game of the years, game of the decade type of lists. So, what kind of data do we get from a list like this, pulling from as deep as a top 1,000? Well, the NES gets a huge bump to the top, but it and the Super Nintendo are just clearly above everything else. At least the portables made their way into the middle this time. Then, since the Acclaimed list was just so big and juicy, I did decide to give it a second totals poll, seeing how often every console was included, period, and that includes all kinds of ports, third-party, and whatever year. Okay, yeah, the usual jumps are here, but that NES and SNES continue to hold strong off of stuff like their high number of arcade ports. Now I looked at the numbers, and the numbers don't lie. But what do they spell? I actually don't have it in me to award any 1 stars today, because even the lowest reviewed consoles were not drastically lower across any of these lists compared to some of our others. That said, the clear bottom tier and 2-star receivers are the 3DS and the Wii U. What an honor it was to grow my channel during such a prodigious time in Nintendo's history. 3 stars are going to the handheld trio of the GBA, Game Boy, and DS, which either have a mix of high and low rankings across these lists or just kind of float in the middle of the pack. 4 stars go to the NES, N64, and the Wii, off the backs of a pretty consistent top 5 mention from critics across our charts. And the clear 5-star top tier goes to the clear leaders, the GameCube, the Switch, and the Super Nintendo. The GameCube and Switch never have a single list where they drop below the top 5, and the Super Nintendo never drops below a top 3. And as far as writers go, that's all she wrote. But perhaps you are sick of having these numbers force-fed down your throats by the game critic elites. You want to know what the people really want. What do the people really want? Now, according to a YouGov survey I saw across several countries and markets, the average buyer relies on consumer reviews at a solidly higher rate than critic scores alone. So let's have it. What do you guys even want? Well, once again, we can start the game here at Metacritic, which follows our likely largest pool of participants to follow. Similar to last time, I polled for a number of games with a user score of 85 or higher, making a cutoff to include games with over 50 user reviews. Right away, once again, we're seeing a pretty even spread across all consoles. Every Nintendo console has games that people love. We all know this. But as far as the ones that people really love, the portables are back in play, baby, with both the DS and the Game Boy Advance joining the top 3. Next up is a second poll I did which looked at the totals, so every single mention of games at 85 plus regardless of release date. And yeah, Switch and the GameCube, doing their thing. Looking at Moby games so that we can include our retro consoles again, I sorted by top 250 with at least 25 user reviews. For original game releases, we've got this. Oh my god, the Super Nintendo! More than doubling second place. Also, the Switch is way down, tied for second to last with the Wii U. That's a new sentence. And here's the numbers with all game mentions. Much smaller GameCube bump than we've seen in the past, but otherwise it's business as usual. Also, since we're in the user score world instead of the critic score one, we have access to a few new sites, including ROG, Backlogged, and IGDB. ROG made it easy to filter for Nintendo games only, so here's the top 250 I found for Nintendo offerings specifically. I think the final total was more like 240 after duplicate entries, but you get the picture. For exclusive games, we've got another strong showing from the DS and the GBA for portable love. The Switch is a bit lower than we've seen for raw exclusives, but then you include that total shared games list again, and it's doing the thing that it does. Is including the third-party thing too powerful? I mean, it's really important, but every time we turn it on, it's like the Nintendo Switch activated their second lightsaber on the chart. Should we stop this? Is it too much? I don't know. I gotta think about it. Let me get back to you. Backlogged exclusives is another wild one. In general, this site seems to have much stricter user reviews. Or maybe they just like Nintendo games less, I don't know. I decided to include all games with a user score of 4 out of 5 or higher. The DS is back on top, but it's on top by far, powered by this site's absolute love of visual novels. And yeah, the DS has got a whole lot of those. Meanwhile, these guys hate the old consoles, with the NES and Game Boy just eating dirt. Previously guaranteed inclusions like Gold, Silver, and Crystal just barely missed the cut. And yeah, we're beating the dead horse, but you jump to the totals, and this is by far the most comical Switch jump I've seen. And our last little slice of data comes from IGDB, which tries to do that thing that IMDb does, where they have a weighted list that includes both the average rating and number of votes, which on paper should be a true look at popularity. Unfortunately, the website gives you no easy way to weigh every single Nintendo console against each other, so we've got their teeny tiny sample size of their general top 100 games of all time. Alright, okay, this is plenty. So it's finally time to mash all these lists together and figure out what that tells us. Once again, call me weak, call me biased, but I just don't have it in my heart to give a 1 to any Nintendo console on games. The games are too good. That said, there are two consoles that clearly perform the worst here. The first is the Wii U, which should be no surprise. The second is the Game Boy, which, to me, kind of is. It places last very often, and it never crawls up farther than the middle of the pack. I get it, the modern audience isn't exactly lining up to appreciate or even play monochrome games that aren't named Pokemon, but still, it makes me a little sad. One tier up and we've got the NES, N64, and 3DS, whose scores averaged around the middle of the pack. 4 stars go to the GBA and the Wii, which both received multiple top 5s, but they're still one step away from the top. And our 5-star generals are the same 3 consoles that I gave 5 stars to in the critics section: the Super Nintendo, the GameCube, and the Switch. I guess the critics and users could agree on something after all. Oh wait, hold up! Sources are telling me that there is a 4th winner, and that is the Nintendo DS, which goes a full 2 points higher than its score from the critics. It's kind of funny, because it is the system that contains the game that is the poster child for a low critic score and a high user score. So, when you look at everything, I guess it really do be like that. Now, if you believe that the only thing about a console that matters is perceived game quality and nothing else, then we have some obvious choices for a winner today. But believe it or not, we got more to talk about. Because a video game console is not just something that is popular. It's not just something that gives you great games to play. There are even more intangibles that make them special, even beyond something like a gaming PC. However, we start to run into an issue on these last 2 categories. See, I've been trying really hard to give you guys the objective data. I wanted to take a step back, look at the numbers, and just see, oh, there it is. That's the truth. I don't want to put my subjective opinions in here at all. But as we get closer and closer to the finale, things are starting to get out of my... You simply can't play a video game without a way to control it. And that interface determines on how we interact with the game and how comfortable it is. I think it is a very important thing to talk about with consoles, but it turns out there isn't like a Metacritic for controller reviews that has decades and decades of hundreds of thousands of historical data points to look over. So, we could do a deep dive sentiment analysis by scanning the web. Nope. No, that's not happening. No, I gotta give you my opinions. There's nothing else I can do. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna mix things up and go through every system chronologically here, mainly commenting on the primary control method of each system. I will briefly comment on the optional paid controller upgrades or maybe third-party variants if they're really important, but I am mostly weighing my scores on what each system gives you right out of the box. It isn't pretty and it isn't flashy, but it's undeniable that for its era, the NES just gets the job done. They took the success and feel of the D-pads from the old Game & Watch systems and just translated it really well to simple games of the era. The buttons feel much more responsive than the Master System, and it had a bonus start and select button to work with. I still don't know if this is quite comfortable. I mean, it is a sharp rectangle. The NES Advantage was a cool gimmick, but I don't actually prefer using it. I just like the turbo button. And the second version of their controller that they released a lot later, often affectionately called the dog bone, is way more comfortable to hold, but I still don't prefer it because it just isn't the most comfortable to use. Your thumb comes from this direction, not this direction. I'm sure you could combine all these controllers to make the perfect retro controller for the NES, but with that original form factor, I still think it's pretty good. 4 stars. The Game Boy has pretty much the same number of button options, but placed into slightly less ergonomic form factor with a vertical rectangle instead of a horizontal one. Now, if I go back in time to when I was a kid, I can't remember ever having an issue holding this thing, but as an adult, it is not my go-to favorite way to hold a system. I would say that only the larger original chunky DMG Game Boy is comfortable. It's nothing to write home about, but it also doesn't ruin my day either. The Game Boy gets a 3. Now, the Super Nintendo, though, they had some great ideas here, and I think it's no surprise that every modern controller today borrows that same design philosophy of a diamond button layout alongside a left and right shoulder button. There's just something about it that feels sleek, comfortable, and premium. I usually prefer this to the Genesis controllers, especially the original one with only 3 buttons. I just think that this is an awesome controller. I like to hold it today. They didn't reinvent the wheel, they just made a better wheel. It's 5 stars, okay? Next up, we have a real surprise here with the Virtual Boy controller. This thing has a surprisingly ergonomic grip with responsive triggers and the unique design decision to use a mirrored layout for buttons, giving us the rare symmetrical D-pad on each side of the What are we doing here? What is happening? Okay, yeah, I'm being a little silly stupid with it, but I did just want to comment on why we're not talking about the Virtual Boy today. And that is because it is not a real video game console. Okay, it's a real console. It has real games on it, but just look at the numbers. Let them speak for themselves. It sold 750,000 units and has 22 total games, including all regions. It's a really interesting piece of Nintendo history, but in a best Nintendo system ever video, I cannot justify talking about this thing because it would be last in almost every category. Kind of a sick controller though. Like, you can't take that away from it. A not so sick controller though? This Trident thing. Now, I want to address this right away. Everybody says, oh, why'd they make a controller for people with 3 hands? And yeah, it's weird, but it's not that weird. Nintendo was attempting to break new ground by introducing the analog stick. Come to think of it, I don't think their stick is actually analog, but regardless, this was the first time a major gaming console added this into their debut controller. Okay, you can use this controller in the stick mode, or if that whole thing doesn't catch on, you can play it like a classic D-pad controller too. There's almost no game that uses both the left and center prongs, or the ones that do not make you switch between the two quickly. But ignoring the 3 hands thing, it's still not that great. It has an uncomfortable, uneven grip. The arrangement of C buttons is a sort of second D-pad that they understood you'd want to use to adjust the camera, but it's really asking for there to be a stick there. I do love the Z trigger though, and resting behind the controller, it's got that unique feel that really works for things like first-person shooters. Here's the problem though. Very shortly after the debut of the N64, Sony had their own analog stick controller that just obliterates the N64. The stick and the D-pad are right next to each other, which does allow you to quick swap between the two in the same grip. Plus it has a second stick instead of the awkward C buttons. And it's just much more comfortable. And arguably, worst of all, the Nintendo 64 stick is not high quality. The ridges are uncomfortable, the plastic is cheap, and they break or loosen a lot. In a vacuum, it's an okay controller for its time. It's serviceable. But when you look at the competition, I just think it's a weaker offering. 2 stars. And moving back to the portables is the Game Boy Advance, which I would argue is Nintendo's first console with major distinguishable form factors. It's certainly simple and streamlined, giving us just 2 more buttons than the original Game Boy over a decade later. Considering how this thing is so often used as a Super Nintendo on the go, I am surprised that we got only 2 face buttons instead of 4. The GBA is unique because you kinda gotta choose your own adventure. The original Game Boy Advance is nice and wide and generally comfortable. The buttons maybe have a tiny bit of mush to them, but I like this form factor overall. The SP has much nicer buttons with a satisfying click, but it does cramp your hand into this claw shape, and I don't like the miniature shoulder triggers. Then you've got the Micro, which is more like a gimmick console. On paper, it is way too small for almost any non-child's hands. Alright guys, I do want to get something off my chest, and that is that I really love the Game Boy Micro. This is like a deep, dark secret of mine, because I'm always complaining about how controllers are too small, and the whole console is this size, but for some reason, I like it. I don't know if I would say it feels comfortable, but it's like, when I'm using it, it makes me so happy that I just don't care. I don't know, I need to talk with a therapist about it, but for some reason, I do like the Micro. Without digging too deeply into the extras, I just think that there are solid options here. 4 stars. And coming up next, of course, we have the Game... It's one of, if not the most comfortable Nintendo controllers to hold in your hands, which I think is its obvious strength. And it has enough standard features to work with third-party titles, all while boasting a couple of unique ideas that we have still not replicated to this day. The analog triggers are a very cool, unique addition, which gives you some cool gameplay experiences, like pressure sensitivity in Super Mario Sunshine. I'm also a big fan of the unique button layout, which uses different button sizes and shapes to give you a distinct feel compared to traditional 4-button cross controllers. I can nitpick a few things that don't make it perfect. Some people don't like the smaller right side C-stick, I think it's fine. Some people don't love the tiny, imprecise D-pad. Okay, I agree with that one. And you could also argue that it's missing a few controller options that its peers had. Neither joystick clicks in, and I don't really understand why it has just one shoulder button. There's a reason that they made a dedicated adapter to keep using this thing years and years and years after its release. And yeah, I know a lot of people associate this with Smash Bros. It's the Smash Bros. Controller, but to me it's more than that. It's just a really good controller. 5 stars. Moving on to the DS, it's in the good realm. It feels fine. We've got a D-pad and a standard shoulder and face button again, but hey look, we got 4 buttons this time. It does feel a little outdated when you have a D-pad compared to the PSP rocking a full analog nub. But of course, it is impossible to talk about the DS without talking about the touchscreen. Touching is good after all. The DS is a bit of an oddball because we're going in 2 different directions. Fully 3D games compensated for this by using the touchscreen as a method for tapping and dragging to rotate the camera. I have never enjoyed this. They even tried using this thumb strap nub thing as a pseudo right stick, and it was garbage. They dropped that almost immediately. They designed games around the console, and the touchscreen was mostly used as a classic stylus tap and play. It brought me back to the realm of Palm Pilots, if you remember those. Just like the GBA, you do have to play a little choose-your-own-adventure game when it comes to your feel. I would say the DS feels better than the DS Lite with its clickier buttons, but that screen is so much worse. It might not be perfect, but I think that the DS has plenty to offer with the software that actually comes with the system. 4 stars. And speaking of experimental controller offerings, next up we've got the... Oh boy. How do you even begin talking about the Wii? This is its own unique beast, built around the concept of making a playable television controller that also sort of works as an NES controller on its side. Just as the DS added the touchscreen as a new method of gameplay, the Wii brings us into a world of motion controls. You've got an accelerometer for tilting stuff, a sensor for pointing and shooting and clicking. This is a tremendous mixed bag, and it really depends on which dev you have and the lighting in your house and the position you have the sensor bar in. Some games feel well designed around the controller, while others feel half-baked or not very responsive. Nothing feels worse in a game than when you know what to do and you're trying to do it, but the game's interface is not letting you do it. Even when they added the Wii Motion Plus accessory, which added a gyroscope for more accurate tilting and aiming, there are like 5 games that require it. But beyond just this guy, we can also talk about this guy, the nunchuck, aka the necessary addition in order to make this package function like a real modern controller. The two sides combined are actually extremely comfortable, lightweight, and they're basically indestructible. You will break your TV before you break your Wiimote. The Wii Motion gameplay has to take over the responsibility of camera work and having significantly less buttons to work with as a whole. It can feel like a huge limitation for ports from consoles that have all of these buttons. Like, day one from launch, you have Twilight Princess, where the 5-year-older console can freely move the camera around and the new console can't. That's rough, buddy. And I don't got a lot to say, but some games can use these controllers, which have a more traditional layout. But that list is small, and the amount of first-party games that actually support this thing is tiny. The Wiimote did important things, and we will talk about that later, but for now, the best I'm willing to give it is a 2. I almost want to give it a 1, but it's really comfortable, the buttons feel great, and there are a couple of first-party offerings where the control schemes work really well. So I will give it that. Next up is something that chose not to reinvent the wheel, at least with the controller, and that is the 3DS. It's basically a DS, except they added a nub thing that the PSP was doing 6 years ago, and they said, you know what, we actually do want one of those. The awkward thing is that by the time this thing dropped, the Vita said, actually, I would like 2 of those. Modern 3D games need a second stick for the camera. And the 3DS said, nah, we don't need any of that. Just like the DS, we're gonna design games around our hardware that, shoot, you know what? I probably do want one of those actually. Sometimes. Just make it all the time. Just add a little nub and call it a day. The other control gimmick that this system uses for 3D is gyroscopic motion aiming. And I know what you're gonna say, I did just trash on the Wii, but I have to be honest, this just feels so much better. The new 3DS also added some slightly awkward to reach bonus shoulder buttons. Considering that there is almost no new 3DS exclusive content, these might be the 2 least used Nintendo controller buttons of all time. Yeah, I'm gonna be real with you guys, there's a very good chance it's been almost 10 years since I've pressed these buttons. Feels kinda wrong. I'm giving this one another 4. It continued to do the simple things that the DS did well, while trying a few new things that give us better options in 3D space. And hey, you like the DS? Well, now your whole home console's a DS. Welcome to the Wii U. So it took them over 15 years in the 3D era of gaming, but this is the first time that a controller from Nintendo has all of the buttons on a modern system. 4 shoulder buttons and joysticks that actually click in. The future is now, and that future also includes a controller that is over a pound and has a massive low-resolution screen inside of it. It does have a cheap and flimsy feel, but those grooves fit well, and I have never, ever gotten hand fatigue when using this system. The buttons are nice and big, and I like how they feel. And they even kept one of my favorite 3DS features with the gyro aiming, and that feels awesome in stuff like Wind Waker and Splatoon. Unlike the DS, which I feel like uses its touchscreen all the time, the Wii U is sort of supplementary. I wouldn't say that's a bad thing for its controls, but it is a little weird that this giant screen is not really being used as a controller that often. Well, worry not, because we have the Pro controller for you, which is the exact same controller, minus the screen. And the gyro. Now, I do have one more major complaint about the Wii U offerings, and that's that they made the bizarre situation to put the buttons below the sticks. It's acceptable, and you'll get used to it, I just don't prefer it. This is a small thing, but it feels much more natural for me to move the camera with my right thumb and slide it up to do an action, versus moving my camera up top and then sliding my thumb down. It's a functional controller that never really bothered me. For the first time, I'm giving the Wii U a score above a 3 with a 4. And moving back to the present, we got the good old Nintendo Switch, which has been the main console for 8 years, so if you're watching this video when it was new, there's a good chance you grew up on this thing. Or at the very least, you definitely know about it. Here are the pros and the cons. On paper, the Joy-Cons are a revolutionary idea in how versatile they are. They're trying to beat all of Nintendo's controller offerings of the last decade plus at the same time. You can play the controller in a mode that looks like a portable console, like the Wii U gamepad, or a mode where you can have one in each hand, or one on the side that looks like an NES controller, it's like the Wii. Or you just slap these bad boys into a mold and it makes a more traditional controller. We're asking a lot of these little guys, and to be honest, that's where my first complaint comes. They are little guys. Like, yeah, I'm a big hands man, and yeah, that is a major factor, but the buttons are tiny, the form factor is a little strange, the stick and the buttons are very close together when you're holding them sideways. There's a lot going on here, and it is not very comfortable. On the opposite size problem, as a portable unit, the Switch is pretty big, and there's no grip or ergonomic shape at the back of the system at all. A third-party grip solution is basically essential for me. And then, of course, there's the big thing that everybody knew was coming. Responsiveness syndrome, or so-called drifting. While other modern joysticks are not immune to this problem, the Switch Joy-Cons are just so bad with it. They constantly break down due to internal wear and tear, or just general poor joystick design. Once a stick goes bad, it either doesn't work or constantly pushes you in the same direction forever, and that leaves you with a bunch of bad options. You can wait for weeks for support to send you one back, you can buy a new expensive replacement, or you gotta open the thing up yourself and do your own fix for a little bit less, but an inconvenience to you. I've had to replace so many Joy-Cons, and yeah, I am a content creator who plays the Nintendo Switch a lot more than the average person, but still, I've never had to do this with another console. Between the low quality, low comfort, and high failure rate, the Nintendo Switch is the proud owner of my least favorite Nintendo controller. But also my favorite. Yeah, the Pro controller they offer is just awesome. Great feel, great weight, nice big buttons and gyro. It is missing some small features like a headphone jack, and the D-pad is not the best, but I am always happy to play games on this thing. The Joy-Cons are an easy 1 for me, but the Pro controller brings enough to the table to push it up to a 2. I know that might not seem fair, but I cannot justify giving it a higher score because I play this thing in portable mode more than 75% of the time. I'm stuck with the Joy-Cons. Well fam, we're almost at the end of the journey, and there's just one final category for us to tackle, and that is... This is going to be another aspect that is very difficult to quantify with data. Still, I think it's very important that we talk about consoles that drive the whole medium of video games forward in unique and creative ways. We're going to look at the system, hardware, upgrades, and accessories, whatever each Nintendo system did to create brand new experiences, with a special appreciation for systems that did things that would be adopted by competitors or for future generations to come. We already talked about power, so this section is going to focus more heavily on other forms of new gameplay and interactive experiences. We're also going to get a lot of crossover from pretty much everything we've talked about today, but I'll try my best to not repeat myself, and this is a metric worth looking at on its own. I really believe that. So who changed the game? We're going back through all the contestants one last time in chronological order. Starting at the bottom, we've got the beginning of everything. The NES innovated the games industry by giving us good video games instead of bad video games. No, I'm dead serious. Nintendo worked very hard to make sure that they had a bunch of exclusive agreements, had quality control over the games that were submitted on their console, and approved the games that were submitted on their console with that bad boy right there. They specifically wanted this console to have good games to separate it from what happened to Atari. It's impossible to overstate how big the video game crash was in the mid-80s, especially in the United States. The entire games market dropped by 97% over 2 years. Games filled up bargain bins or even landfills because there was just so much junk and counterfeits and clones and zero regulation for what software was allowed to be sold. But hey, you make good video games and all of a sudden people want a box with good video games on it. And that's why they got suckers like me still buying the Mario box all these years later. Look guys, it's got Mario on it. Nintendo also really pushed the concept of adding extra hardware and features into game cartridges themselves, and is typically credited as the first home console to introduce saving to your data. Before this, we mostly relied on restarting a game from the very beginning or using a level password, and that only really works for linear games. And while I would not say the NES invented this, they did really popularize the idea of having additional hardware and peripherals as a major selling point of a system. The quality of these are, of course, mixed, but there was always a bundle giving you some kind of new control scheme or gameplay type. Move, shoot, work alongside a robot. If nothing else, it helped get video game consoles into stores again. And we did briefly cover this, but the NES truly popularized the D-pad in home consoles, which is something that basically every major home console has had a variant of for all time since. It's a little dramatic, but when people say that the NES saved video games or whatever, they do actually mean it in a way. They found a way to make quality games and laid the foundation for what we see from video game consoles as a whole today. It's an easy 5 out of 5 for me. So, the Game Boy is an interesting one. Tech-wise, it was nowhere close to breaking barriers, offering less in almost every technical department and instead thriving on good games, indestructible hardware, and a huge battery life. I think most of its impressive tech came from the peripherals though, where it might be Nintendo's craziest list of accessories on a console ever. The link cable felt like true black magic as a kid, allowing for multiplayer and even exchanging data between two systems far away from a TV screen. Doing this at pretty much any place where you're with another human, far away from a TV, felt very revolutionary at the time. They also went wild with the amount of ways that you could experiment with a single cartridge slot. You could have rumble, motion controls, a camera, a printer, a sewing machine? Sonar fishing device? What? If you squint hard enough, this mix of lifestyle and gaming applications in an all-in-one device almost feels like an early cell phone. Oh yeah, there was also the cell phone add-on. I'm giving the Game Boy a 4, which is maybe too generous, but it found so many ways to stay relevant, experimental, and interesting for a really long time. The Super Nintendo did not break a lot of new ground so much as establish a solid technical spec for its time. It looks good, it sounds good. A few things did stick though. Like we mentioned, that controller layout, especially the addition of the shoulder buttons, would become standard for basically forever. Other than the pure power of the system, which yeah we covered, you have to dig a little deeper to find unique Super Nintendo stuff. The Game Boy Player was neat, recognizing that portable titles are still desirable for play on the big screen. We'd see this desire come back for years to come. The original model did run its games slightly too quickly, but we'll ignore that for now. They fixed it in Japan? I don't know. And speaking of Japan, they got the exclusive Satellaview, which was definitely ahead of its time. It used a satellite modem to bring downloadable games, content, magazines, and updates right to your system, all the way back in 1995. It also had some really cool early interactive experiments like live commentary broadcasts and an interactive avatar-based home screen. Like I said though, you gotta dig kinda deep to find the cool stuff. It's an amazing console with amazing games, but as far as raw innovation, I'm feeling a 2 for this one. Moving up to the N64, we have another one that made most of its innovations through peripherals. This system did push the boundaries of 3D rendering and gaming, and there were obvious tech developments to push that as well. It was one of the first game consoles that pushed a thumbstick as a primary form of movement in its main controller, which obviously was adopted everywhere as 3D gaming became the norm. The Rumble Pack was also one of the first major uses of force feedback on a home system. This made bumps, blasts, and shots feel more immersive while you play, and it is totally standard in today's console controllers. Also, before you guys storm the comment section, yes, I am aware, in Japan, the PlayStation 1 controller with analog sticks and rumble came out. The rumble comes before the N64 rumble, and the analog stick is a little bit after the N64 stick. Overall, this is one of those situations where Nintendo did not invent this technology, but they were a big part of popularizing it. If that makes sense? And speaking of controllers, the N64 was the first home system to give you 4 controller ports right out of the box instead of an optional peripheral, which really incentivized the development of full split screen and multiplayer experiences. Another niche thing you could slap into this bad boy was the Transfer Pack, which let you exchange data between your Game Boy and N64 for cross-data play, letting you do cool things like import your Game Boy Mario Sports avatars onto the big screen, or very obviously, enabling the transfer of Pokémon back and forth in Stadium. This system did absolutely blow my mind as a kid. Going from 2D to 3D alone just felt like I was witnessing the future. But when I look back on the impact the N64 had on the gaming landscape as a whole, I do feel like this is rose-tinted goggles a little bit. I'm giving it a 3. Now, the Game Boy Advance, like I mentioned, had one of the shortest dedicated runs of a Nintendo console ever, and yeah, it still shows. It is a more powerful Game Boy. And that's it. I mean, I don't know, it gave us the e-reader, which was like an early form of DLC, exchanging new data by reading .code and interacting with existing games, or giving you a really early version of the Virtual Console. Nintendo would also once again push that link between the portable and home console, this time giving you a cable that directly interacted with games, sometimes even giving you a second screen to control from. They also had that wireless adapter that was used by like 2 games, then made obsolete by the DS right away. Yeah, I got nothing. I think this is the perfect example of a 1 for innovation. It's a cool system, gave us great games, but that doesn't matter right now. I just don't think that it did anything fun or new or weird or interesting. But then with the GameCube, we've got... I hate to say it, I got nothing again. The only thing I can think of with the GameCube is that they dropped the first reliable first-party wireless controller. They're nowhere near close to first on that tech, but yeah, it did help normalize it after this. Otherwise, I'm struggling. The Game Boy player we've seen before, it had the most limited online of its generation, it couldn't play DVDs, it has a handle? Don't think many other consoles have a handle now, do they? So after a handful of generally normal but technically powerful systems, Nintendo gives us this and says, we're not going to be normal anymore. We're going nuts! The form factor of a 2-screen system is crazy, allowing for all kinds of unique gameplay experiences and control schemes. Normalizing a touchscreen as a major input opened up so many doors and gameplay styles. Obviously, it brought in brand new casual audiences who could easily interact with this new medium, like petting a dog or answering math equations. But it also gave us a wide range of unique genres and experiences that we use today. We've seen games on a touchscreen before, but never anything of this quality this frequently. It was also one of the first consoles to utilize Wi-Fi for immediately integrated online play. And even the local wireless play was pretty robust too. I'll never forget cramming into a room full of my family members while we all played Mario Kart DS on a single shared cartridge. It just worked. There are some less widespread features like the built-in microphone and integrated chat software, but in general, this was a system that tried some really experimental stuff, and a lot of it stuck. Easy 5. And yeah, while we're in the era, I'm giving a 5 to the Wii as well. And yeah, I was just dumping on this thing, but you cannot deny that it did something revolutionary. Like the old code name. It brought new people to video games who had never touched a controller before. And you just can't take that away from the Wii. My 70-year-old grandma had a Wii and played it like every day. That is very special. If you bring more types of people into gaming, the more we can get a shared understanding with each other and enjoy this awesome media together. Motion controls are such a big thing that every major game company felt like they had to make their own version to follow suit. Even down to the simple UI design and the hyper-simple Mii avatars and Miiverse social systems, the Wii found a way to make your unique identity feel like an important part of gaming, which again, was something that other major consoles added their own spin on later. The Wii also tried some unique hybrid gaming and lifestyle experiences, especially with stuff like the Wii Balance Board. And I'll also give the Wii a point for attempting to find a home for the history of gaming, even beyond Nintendo consoles, with their huge Virtual Console program. Now obviously, high-quality PC emulation is a thing today, and it was even a thing back then, but for its time, it was a pretty cool idea that you could just grab an old game that you wanted to for a couple of bucks, download it, and start playing it right away. The Nintendo 3DS is built on a pretty insane proposition. Would you like to play your games in 3D all the time? No, not like that. Of course not like that. Do you think we're insane? And yeah, they tried to make it work on the GameCube, but that was too expensive, so here's our deal. Would you be interested in 3D if it worked and was affordable and you didn't have to put anything on your face to do it? And the answer to that is... kind of? I feel like everybody had a very different experience when it came to this thing. Some people were immediately blown away, while others really struggled with it or hated that you couldn't see the 3D effect well at an angle. Something that they would improve pretty dramatically with the ingeniously titled New 3DS. And a ton of people, no matter what upgrades they did, just did not care for the 3D at all and kept that Switch off at all times. Personally, I actually do like how the 3D looks. I find myself always turning it on today when I go back to play the 3DS because that's a unique thing that other consoles don't offer. But when it was brand new, I used the 3D, I don't know, a little less than half of the time. Some games use it well, while for others, it's just a very mild gimmick. Man, 3D is such a weird thing. It was really big for a second in movie theaters, and it basically never took off when they tried to make 3D TVs a thing. And even today, like, I'm one of the biggest VR enthusiasts ever, but it's a pretty niche experience. Most people don't care that much about being immersed in games. And it clearly was not an essential gimmick because they did release a system that took the 3 out of the 3DS. Okay, I'm up my soapbox. Let's get past the 3D. What else did the 3DS do that we didn't already see from the DS? Never really went far, but they did try a couple of augmented reality experiences. Again, an early immersion thing, but it is a very early look at what we would see with things like Pokemon Go today. The 3DS also had an incredibly unique social gaming system with Street Pass, where just being in proximity of another 3DS user allowed for you to exchange information. I don't think this ever caught on, and I can see how there's some safety concerns of broadcasting to other people that you're in the same general area as them, but I personally only had really good experiences with this. Did it change gaming forever? No, but I've never seen anything like it before, and I'm worried we won't really see anything like it again. The 3DS tried a lot of crazy things, and while I don't think that everything stuck the landing or changed the entire gaming universe, I do really respect what it was going for. It's done some things that I've never seen again in a console, and I'm gonna give it a very generous 4. And next up is the Wii U, which is just kind of a weird system. What if we took the DS and maybe the bottom screen is in your hands and the top screen's your TV? Is that anything? Can we do anything with this? I feel like they never really committed to the potential of what this system could do. Before the system came out, I remember them demoing all of these potential gameplay experiences, but we never really got the dev firepower to deliver on this long term. When I think of the very best Wii U games, there are not a lot of titles that use the system's core concept. Which is why almost every good Wii U game ported straight to the Switch with almost nothing of value lost. Besides that gameplay option though, the Wii U did offer another major idea. What if you just played your whole console away from the TV? Is that something you're interested in? A lot of reviewers immediately noted how this was a lot better than trying to combine the two screens at the same time. Just chilling in bed or on the couch with a big old screen in the palm of your hands felt good. And while it wasn't a mandatory feature in every game, a lot of the best games gave you that option, and it's nice. If only there was some way to use the gamepad without being tethered to a big box all the time. Miiverse kind of took some earlier console ideas and ran with it, giving you a direct social media system that integrated with the games themselves. The end result was kinda messy and often hilarious, but it was pretty distinctive in the era just before everyone had their own high-quality smartphone at all times. I'm giving the Wii U a 3. It sticks out like a sore thumb in a lot of ways, but you can definitely argue that this does lay the foundation for the... Man, what else is there to say? After cranking out portable and home console games in their separate universes for almost 30 years and occasionally having the two hold hands together, they finally went ahead and did the fusion dance and gave us a true hybrid between the two. It's not as comfortable as Wii U, but the better screen makes for a much more aesthetically appealing experience. And you can just take it anywhere! This broke major ground, and there's a reason that almost every gaming hardware company has worked to get their own mark into that portable console hybrid space since. The design philosophy behind the dock is so simple and satisfying. You plop it down, you're on the TV, you pick it up, and you go anywhere. And yeah, the Joy-Cons missed the mark for me personally on a day-to-day experience, but I can't help but admire what they tried to do with them. Carrying the form factor of so many different types of gameplay experiences all in one device is really bold. Man, if these things were bigger and they didn't break so often, I might even like them. But beyond the very obvious industry-moving stuff, they also had some really creative ideas that did not exactly take off. Ring Fit felt like a great evolution to what they had in mind with Wii Fit, while utilizing an actual resistance band instead of just simple balancing exercises. And Labo? Man, that was out there. Hello, can we sell you our cardboard? They're cheap little peripherals, toys, and rudimentary VR. But man, they really took the form factor of the Switch and they did as many cute variations as they could while giving you some fun, creative ideas. If I had anything left to complain about with the Nintendo Switch's innovation cycle, I guess I could say things felt a little stagnant toward the back half of the system's lifespan. Kinda like they just coasted on the success of the first few years and then sat back and watched the money pile up. But like we keep saying, the Nintendo Switch is the literal longest period of time that Nintendo has had a single console without a successor. So maybe it feels like they weren't innovating for a while because they were just successful for so dang long. Also, there was a pandemic for a while, so maybe that stretched the timeline a little bit. I'm not going to pretend to know how it all works, but whatever way you slice it, this is an easy 5 out of 5. And next up, we have the best console... That's it. We have the best Nintendo console. We did it. We survived to the end. We really made it. I tried my best to pull in everything that we could from everywhere that we could. It was definitely not perfect, but we're here. And now it's like the end of a Mario Party game. You ready to see who got the most stars? It's time to determine the best Nintendo console of all time. All right, the top 3. Oh, just laying my cards on the table, but that's my personal favorite. And with number 2, we've got... Oh, a tie? For real? We could do most coins? Isn't that what you usually... Oh, no, we didn't give out coins. I could give away a few bonus stars. Who landed on the most green spaces? Check the footage! And what a poetic way to go. From the very first chapter to the last chapter, it looks like Nintendo has 2 great bookends where we... No, this is stupid. No, that's not what I want. That's corny, and I want a real winner. That's what we came here for. So let's do what we came here for. Let's remove all categories where I had a say in the score when we had no hard data to work with. Get them out of here. So, no controllers, no innovation. I'll even say no to power since I did have to weigh in on that. Run those numbers again. This must be what the people want. Oh, okay. Something new's gonna happen. All right, I mean, we basically have to admit it. It's the Nintendo Switch. It's creative, it's cheap, it has an insane library, it lasted forever. I mean, what more else is there to say? Except maybe that wasn't objective either? I mean, you still had to rely on me taking all of that data and turning it into a score from 1 to 5. What if I had some personal bias there? I mean, that's just straight up not fair, so we gotta run it again. Instead of scores, let's take every single database score category and rank each system solely by their average placements across each. The more often a console scored toward the top of a graph, the better chance they have of taking it all. Just take me out of the equation completely. And what does it change? Oh my god, can anything beat the Switch? Anybody? Okay, hold up. Now, we were talking about this earlier, and I just think it's time we went out and said it. The Switch has been cheating. I mean, every single time we're adding games from third parties? Who plays third-party games in a Nintendo console? Now, I only want to see the exclusives. That is how you're fair and objective. Oh, there you go. See, we knocked the Switch down from its pedestal all the way down to second place. All right, that was actually a pretty bad call by me because I was making an assumption about what we care about in consoles, but how about we look at what people actually care about by looking at real consumer data?
Well, sure, if you look at the YouGov survey for factors that influence US gamers when choosing consoles, you'll see that it's very obvious that—
Okay, I've had enough. Stop it. Stop, just make it go away. No, we've done enough. We've done way too much. It's a free-for-all at this point. Just pick your own favorite console based on all the things that I said. Is your favorite the Wii U? It can even be the Wii U. I like the Wii U. Mostly. And at the end of the day, while it is very fun looking at all of the things that these consoles succeeded in or failed in over the last 40 years, There are so many other factors for us personally for why we like different consoles over what the masses like. We're not robots. We all have different unique things that make games fun for us. Beyond all the money that a console made, or how many people played them, or what some random reviewer gave a big number to, I can think of so many more real reasons for why a video game console might be the best for you. Things like the console that has your #1 favorite game, your first console, the console that you played the most with your friends, or maybe it's the video game console that turned you into who you are today. Because games are, of course, more than just a hobby or a silly distraction. It can be that, it can be funny, it can be fun, but ultimately, I feel like video games are life-changing. They can bring us to new heights. They can totally change the people that we're talking with. You can make new lifelong friends through games. I just truly believe that the most powerful console, the best console, is one that changes the way you see the world around you.